that. How's everyone doing today? We good? Awesome. So, yes, no? There we go. All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. Then we're going to go through some different incentives, talking through various incentives that motivate people. And then I'm going to talk about how you can nudge some of those incentives. And finally, there's a brief putting it all together. So first of all, who am I? I like to write. I have a blog on Medium. I like to read, especially fantasy. I like to bake, especially pies. And I like to run, especially really long distances on trails. In fact, I ran about 30 miles on the South Downs Way a couple days ago. But none of that is why you're here today. So who am I professionally? I like to write. So I blog occasionally about running, but I also write about career stuff, DEI stuff, actual technical stuff, whatever happens to be top of mind. I've worked at a few different companies now. I worked at a tiny startup. I worked at Microsoft. I was at Box for quite a while, which is where I entered and left management. And I'm currently at Split, who was actually just acquired by Harness. So I still kind of associate with Split. My slides are all Split. I hope they understand. I'm a back-end engineer. I'm working primarily in Java these days. I've done a few other things. I've done a lot of stuff with splitting monoliths into microservices, thinking about microservices architecture, a lot of stuff with REST APIs, and a lot of stuff with authorization specifically, also a little authentication. So Split, what does Split do? So we're a feature flagging company. Hopefully most of you in here kind of roughly know what feature flags are, but for those of you who don't, it's basically a way that you can add some code that allows you to switch between different code paths using a completely separate graphical user interface. So the idea is that, if something goes wrong, you can quickly turn it off. For anyone who has used feature flags, you will know that there is a common problem where your code just gets littered with feature flags. In fact, I was talking to somebody last night who was asking me about this. They're like, how do you solve this problem? Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So, former company I worked at had this problem. And what they did was they basically enforced a maximum limit. And they said, I don't remember the exact number, but we can only have X number of flags in our code. So basically this meant that if you wanted to add a new flag, you had to first take one out. This led to some good things. For example, we never had more than that maximum number of flags, but it also incentivized some bad behavior. So first of all, if I had a small change, like a small fix, but it was kind of risky, I was suddenly incentivized to just take that risk and push it out because I didn't want to spend a day or 2 days trying to pull out a feature flag when my fix was, 5 lines of code. So it incentivized slightly riskier behavior. The other problem was that I actually knew people who said this. They would basically save feature flags. So they knew that they had a new feature coming up, so they were going to need a feature flag. And they were like, oh, there's this easy one I know of that's going to be super simple to remove, so I'm going to leave it in the code. Even though I have time now to remove it, it's going to stay there because I want to be able to remove that when I need it. So people were hoarding feature flags, another bad behavior. Which brings me to my topic, influencing through getting your carrots in a row. One common thing I see among a lot of senior engineers is we like to think that the reason somebody isn't doing something is that they just don't understand. If I can just convince them that this is the right thing to do, they will get on board, they will do it. So it's all about convincing. But then we often find that we do our best at convincing, and yet it's still like herding cats. The cats are everywhere. Engineers are not following along. So I want to talk today about how to get I'm mixing metaphors here, sorry. About getting your ducks in a row through carrots. So adding little incentives to try to get people to go where you want them to go. So what are some of these incentives? Last fall, I'm sure a lot of you saw this, there was a McKinsey article about measuring software productivity. I'm actually mostly not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the pragmatic engineer response to it. And I particularly liked this quote, which says that the act of measurement changes how developers work as they try to game the system. And And more recently, one of my mentees was talking about how her company measured GitHub commits. I think this is fairly common. And that leads to some good things, right? Like it incentivizes small commits, right? Which hopefully most of us think are usually a good thing, lots of small commits. However, her concern was that she was doing a lot of design work. She was doing a lot of technical documentation. So she wasn't actually producing commits. And she was worried that as layoffs came, maybe she would get cut because she didn't have a lot of commits to her name. And suddenly she was incentivized. In fact, she was asking me, should I stop doing that design work? Should I start cutting corners? Should I take less time on that so that I can get back to doing these commits? So it's also incentivizing not doing these things. So that's one thing. Can we win? A lot of hackathons, if any of you have participated, there's usually prizes. A lot of people work harder than they normally would. That's because some of us are competitive. Not everyone, but some people. What gets recognition? So there's public recognition. Some people really thrive on that. Some people don't. But there's also what gets talked about. Is your work something people are excited about? Do you know that other people are thinking about it? Or even just getting a little thank you on the side. That can often be enough recognition for some people. Like, if I'm doing a ton of work, but nobody says anything to me, I start to wonder, does it really matter? Why am I doing this? What gets promotions? There's a lot of companies tend to think that complexity helps get promotions, and there's a lot of, I'm not going to take a stand on this, but there different companies think, back-end engineering is more complex, or front-end engineering is more complex, or infra is more complex. I think they're all complex in different ways, but sometimes depending on the culture, different things get promotions. People tend to gravitate towards those things that get promotions. Sometimes it's shiny features versus am I doing the tech cleanup work? A lot of times shiny features get a lot more buzz, a lot more emphasis, more likely to get promotions. Not everywhere, that's fine. At a place I formerly worked, right before I joined, our stack looked something like this, right? We had controller, Smarty templates, models, model view controller, basic. The problem was that our models got huge. So then we added a frameworks team and they're like, we're going to add actions. This is going to be great. So we ended up with a system that looked roughly like this. But then the frameworks team was incentivized to add more frameworks. So then we ended up with new actions, which are newer and better than actions. Everybody agreed. But they were not incentivized to migrate stuff off of actions. So then we ended up with new actions. And yes, they were actually called new actions in the code. So we suddenly had 3 frameworks, and sure, they were progressively better, but we had 3 frameworks, and nobody really wanted 3 frameworks. So again, that's because they were getting promoted off of building frameworks, not off of migrating. What is easiest or fastest? I actually don't have a super long thing to say about this, but I actually think this is one of the most common things that is driving people. A lot of us are often have tight deadlines. We need to get that feature out, whatever. So whatever is going to be the easiest way to get something done is often what I'm going to pick. And then the last thing I want to talk about is understanding the people and history. So this is a later version of that earlier diagram. And specifically, I want to talk about this zombie ravioli thing going on. So basically, we had a project that was called Ravioli that was supposed to be about modularizing our code, making it into like nice ravioli chunks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why it became a zombie. So basically, we had a team of smart engineers who were like, I am going to build this great thing. It's going to be so awesome. They built the read use case. They did a really good job building the read use case. And then they said, okay, we need a team to try this out. So my team happened to be the one that had a little bit of space at the time. And so we were like, okay, we'll help you out. We'll try this. And then they started talking to us and we were like, oh, we're the enterprise team, which means we have the admin settings, which means we care about write. We don't really care that much about read. We care about write. Can you support write? And they said, yeah. And then the team died and our trust was shattered, right? So then another team a little bit later came along and was like, yeah, we're going to build this model of microservices. It's going to be great. And we said, prove it. We don't believe you. We've been down this road. We don't believe you anymore. Which actually led to one of the most common monolith splitting patterns is using the strangler fig, right? You like pull the stuff off the edges first. But we were like, no, we don't believe that because we've been tricked before. So we said, you're going to have to pull out the most tricky thing to pull out. And once you can do that, we'll believe that you figured this out. So we did the thing that nobody does. And we did the pulling the core out rather than either the strangler fig or the Big Bang pattern. So understanding the people in history is also important to getting something done. Okay, now that we've talked some about incentives, I want to talk a little bit about how you can align some of those incentives, especially if you maybe don't have explicit authority. So the first one is creating a paved path. I think this gets talked about a lot, but it's still worth mentioning again. Making the right thing to do really easy really helps a lot in terms of getting people to do what you want them to. Again, this is back to that a lot of people are pressed for time. A lot of people just want to do what's fast and easy. So if the right thing is easy, they're probably going to do it. Setting up guardrails. Every time I'm in a post-mortem, this is one of the things I like to think about. Is there a way, like you don't even necessarily have to prevent something from happening. Can you just say like, are you sure you want to do this? And that's often enough to like prevent people from being like, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't. And then, they think twice. That's great. Education and reminders, making sure people know about things, repeating it over and over again. I want to just quickly say, though, that be careful of that trap I mentioned at the very beginning where you think you just need to convince people. This needs to happen because if somebody doesn't know something, they're not going to do it. But this is honestly often not the main problem here. The reminder one I bring up, so we recently went from releasing our code base twice a week to supposed to be every commit. So we announced this change. And what happened was instead of twice a week, suddenly we weren't releasing at all. Weeks went by, no releases. So what I ended up doing was I set up a Slack alert, which was basically like every time the code merges to staging, it's like, you should deploy this. And suddenly, so we're still not releasing quite every commit, but we're releasing once or twice a day now. So it's much, much higher. And a lot of that is just that little reminder of like, oh yeah, I need to release. So helping set up reminders can often help. We talked before about measuring something. So maybe you don't have the ability to necessarily put it in front of engineers, but if you can put measurements, if you can put graphs in front of managers, or maybe you can just put them in a Slack channel. If there's something you want to change, like what are the stats for this, and continually post this over time. Is there a way you can gamify it? So I mentioned the competition before, the games. People like games. At a company I worked for previously, they gamified they actually just basic leaderboard, super simple, for the number of tests you ran. And there were some problems with it eventually, but it did cause people to run more tests. So it did have a lot of the desired impact. So is there a way you can make something a little more fun for people to do? Teamwork. Maybe it's hard for you to convince managers to put aside a bunch of time for like a big project. But recently we took about a week and we had all of engineering work on 2 projects. And we got about 3/4 done with one of the projects and fully completed the other project. And like a lot of that was just the fact that all of the engineers felt like, oh, we're working together, we're in this together, like we can see the deadline and like trying to get this thing done. So that was, and actually a lot of them talked about how much fun they had as well. So that was a really great way to get some stuff done. Earning trust. This is kind of back to some of that other piece of like breaking trust. But for an individual, this can look like, actually getting in the trenches, actually doing on-call rotations, actually writing code, unfortunately, making sure your code actually works when you do write code. But the idea here is that if nobody likes somebody who, I heard this phrase somewhere, swoops and poops, right? Like comes in, says like, oh, you have to change everything, and then leaves. And then like, they have to deal with the mess. But if they already know your reputation, if they already trust you, it's going to be a lot easier to come into a group and then convince them that maybe something slightly different is the right way to do things. Applying social pressure. A lot of us like gold stars. I kind of think this must come from elementary school when we got like little stickers on things, right? Like we like to know that we've done things the correct way. Most people actually do want to do the right thing most of the time. So finding ways to let people know what the right thing is and encourage the right thing and, slight pat on the back if they do happen to do the right thing is often great. Earning social capital. So friends. I'm much more likely to, spend a few minutes to help out somebody I'm friends with than I am a total stranger that I've never met before on the street, right? So it can often seem like a waste of time going to team socials, doing whatever, but it actually can help some of this, right? Because you build those relationships, you build those friendships. You're able to then go in later and be like, I need this favor that's going to take 2 minutes. Can you please help me? And along similar lines, find ways to help others out. People are often also more willing to help you out if you've helped them out in the past. So always be looking for, is there something small that I can do to help somebody else? Whether or not they actually do end up helping you back, this is a nice way to build some of that social capital. And kind of along similar lines, look for places you can negotiate. I don't mean the like hardcore ruthless negotiation. What I mean here is like, maybe that team doesn't have time to build your full project, but is there a piece of the project that they do have time to build? Or maybe you can get some of them to work with a couple people from a different team and together they can build it. Or maybe you can help them out and help build something that they need, and in return they can help build something you need, right? So like find ways that all of you together can maximize what gets done and what the optimal goal that we're trying to get to. And recognizing people. So if you have the opportunity to make announcements in, a team meeting or something, by all means do it. Recognize people who do the right thing. Recognize people who do amazing jobs. If you have the ability, I know my company has awards for various things. So if you have the ability to nominate somebody who's gone above and beyond, do that. But if you don't, my company also has a high five channel. If you don't, like maybe you just have a team Slack, and it's a great way to just be like, thanks so-and-so for doing something, or like, so-and-so did such a great job at this thing. It's really awesome. I'm super proud of them. Whatever it happens to be, right? Like just find little ways to recognize people. And if they don't like public recognition, still try to make sure you say thank you in a private channel, right? Like allowing people to know that they've been seen can go a long ways. So now that we've talked through a lot of those things about the various ways that you can maybe hopefully influence some things, let's try to put it all together. So first of all, what are you trying to change or improve? Hopefully you have a pretty good idea what this is. If you don't, I would recommend revising that. You should know what exactly you're trying to get done here. Then look at what are the incentives that are at play. Listen to people, talk to them. Why aren't they doing the thing that you think is obvious? Try to understand, are there things like are there measurements that go against what they're doing? Like, why are they doing what they're doing? And then look at, are there things you can do to affect or change any of those incentives? Any of the little things I mentioned, anything else? Like, how can you get them better aligned with doing the thing that you think needs to be done? And then it's also worth thinking about what side effects might those changes have. I talked at the beginning, right, about like the feature flags and how putting in that maximum limit caused some undesired side effects. So try to think about what other side effects your proposed change might have. And are you okay with those? Maybe you are. And if you are, that's great. If you're not, then maybe you want to rethink that a little bit and go back and revisit some of these other things. And actually, that's all I had for you today. So hopefully throughout all of this, you can think a little bit more about how you can influence and get some things done through, hopefully, incentives. Thank you.